Hey there, and welcome to my very first video game review. For those who want to watch the review, you can skip to the timeline shown on the screen right now. For those who are curious and want to know where I have been and why I haven't been streaming for almost 2 months, stay and watch the video from here. Without further ado, let's begin. On September 16, 2021, I completed the entire Halo game campaigns in Halo Master Chief Collection on the stream. That stream marked the ending of a long stream series I started back on August 10th the very same year. During the first half of that stream, I was mentally exhausted and felt physically ill from the exercises I've done and the medication I have taken for my sickness. I had let my guard down and vehemently vented about having to cut down my streaming sessions while my Halo team virtual avatar I have been using throughout the second half of my stream series poorly mimicked my movement and my expression. Despite that, anyone who watched the stream at that moment can easily tell that I wasn't doing well. At the tail end of that same stream, I stated that I wanted to take a break from streaming for a while because I wanted to take better care of my health. Afterwards, I had also expressed a desire to stream a couple of horror games the following month as a way to celebrate Spooktober month leading up to Halloween. Unfortunately, my health got in the way and I was unable to do that. Feeling like I've reached yet another obstacle in my life, I decided to dedicate more time completing my huge collection of video games and make videos on the ones I find interesting. This means I can still do video gaming stuff and have more time to improve my health. On October 10, 2021, I took my first step by contacting one of my stream moderators named Brandon. He also called himself the Bear King. So I wished the Bear King a happy birthday and I told the Bear King that I would review a horror game that the Bear King can choose from my game library as a birthday gift. Why? Because I couldn't deliver my promise to the Bear King that I would do a challenge run on the stream on the Bear King's birthday. To those who aren't familiar with it, a challenge run is basically where skilled video game enthusiasts complete a game with a self-imposed handicap or handicaps. It can be a challenge run where they completed a game without dying or getting hit, or it can be a challenge run where they completed a game purposefully the bad way, simply to showcase a higher level of mastery that they've achieved in a certain game. Not to be confused with a speedrun, however, where one would intentionally and masterfully break the game by completing it as fast as possible. After long minutes of the Bear King asking me what games do I have in my Steam library, followed by the Bear King contemplating between Evil Within and Dead Space, the Bear King finally chose Dead Space. Afterwards, I disappeared back into my social media-less rabbit hole and dived myself deep into Dead Space. Why do I want to review video games? I always wanted to review video games. I never really shared this with a lot of people. Ever since I saw Adam Sessler review Neverwinter Nights on a video game review show I watched as a kid called X-Play, I wanted to know more about video games. I wanted to talk more about video games and I wanted to make video games of my own. Sadly, I grew up in a time and place where doing anything that has to do with video games was generally considered to be a waste of one's talent and time. So I gave up on those burning desires of mine. I gave in to the pressures coming from my pretentious ex-peers and my then strict Asian family. I didn't want to be in a place where they would ignore me because I wanted to do video gaming stuff. I was already alone and didn't want to be lonelier than I already was. Even though I have dabbled in some aspects of video game in the past, I never completely submerged myself into it. I always feel like I am not intelligent enough, nor do I feel like I have a good command of English to properly do video gaming stuff, let alone do a video game review. Everyone else at the time was just smarter and had easier access to video games compared to me. And being a 34 years old Southeast Asian man who is struggling to make a career out of being a graphic designer, a filmmaker, and well, a streamer, I decided not to pursue it further and instead focus on stabilizing myself. That is until I've watched Tim Rogers' Action Button video game reviews. It reignited that interest again. In his unconventional long video game review of Pac-Man, he would sometimes interject his own personal life experiences into it, which then somehow relates to the game he was reviewing. It made me think about my childhood and how video games have made it a heck of a lot better because they were around. So here I am, mustering enough courage to finally review a video game. So how do I review the games I'm playing? My review process is based on Tim Rogers' laborious review process for his Final Fantasy VII Remake review. To put it short, he would play multiple playthroughs of the game he's reviewing, each with different goals in mind. For example, in his aforementioned review, he had played Final Fantasy VII Remake 3 times. On his first playthrough, he played as he normally would. On his second playthrough, he imposed an handicap where he can't use any items at all to completion, simulating the hard mode of the game. And on his third and final playthrough, he completed Final Fantasy VII Remake 100%. I am not sure if this is his way of reviewing video games or if it's a standard practice by video game reviewers, but I am deeply interested in applying the same method in my own video game review process. It makes great sense to me to review games this way. Allow me to use the game I'm reviewing now, which is Dead Space, as an example. Basically, I have done 3 complete playthroughs of the game, each with different types of difficulties and self-imposed handicaps. On my first playthrough of Dead Space, I had played and completed it on hard difficulty with no handicap. This is the highest difficulty option available to me from the start, and since I'm an experienced video game player, I feel this difficulty would provide a good challenge and experience for me. In this playthrough, I had focused solely on Dead Space without the distraction of trying to get good video game footage. In other words, I just played the game as I normally would. It goes without saying that this is the playthrough where I spent the most time experimenting on the game mechanics. On my second playthrough of the game, I completed Dead Space on medium difficulty without upgrading my rig. Rig is basically a space armor suit that my character is wearing in the game. In this playthrough, I compare the difficulty and the differences between my previous playthrough of the game and see if there are any interesting differences between them. Adding a self-imposed handicap also gave me the opportunity to see if ignoring certain upgrades and/or mechanics in Dead Space would still provide me, who had completed the game on harder difficulty, a challenge. This is also the playthrough where I'd spent most of my time painstakingly recording and cataloging every scene and event in the game for research and editing purposes. This makes sense to me because I can anticipate what would happen in Dead Space since I've already completed it. In return, this made it easier for me to conduct research as well as organizing the game footage for this review. On my third and final playthrough of Dead Space, I continued my playthrough for my first playthrough of the game. In other words, this is my New Game Plus playthrough. In this playthrough, I have made an effort not to play Dead Space the same way as I did before. What I meant by that is, I played Dead Space differently. For example, on my first and second playthroughs of Dead Space, I will make sure that I have the plasma cutter and pulse rifle at all times because those are excellent weapons both on my first and second playthrough of the game. So on my third playthrough, I ditched plasma cutter and pulse rifle in favor of other weapons. By doing this, I have given myself an interesting handicap that led me to an interesting discoveries and tactics in the game. The idea of this playthrough was inspired by my challenge run for Sekiro, where I have beaten it without using any basic deflection, which is the core defense mechanic of the game. By refusing to use the core defense mechanic, I have found interesting tactics to beat the bosses in the game, which led me to make videos about it. With that being said, it is sad for me to say that it is virtually impossible to beat Dead Space with just curb stomps. Of course, all of my playthroughs were completed without using guides. With this lengthy and laborious process, I honestly feel that I was able to thoroughly experience the majority of what Dead Space had to offer. Speaking of difficulty, I know some of the Dead Space enthusiasts who are watching this are wondering if I had completed Dead Space on impossible difficulty. For those who don't know, impossible difficulty is the final difficulty mode that the player unlocks after they beat the game for the first time. Given my record of beating God of War in Gaming God of War difficulty on my first playthrough, as well as Doom on Nightmare difficulty on my first playthrough, I would love to do that. But unfortunately, I simply do not have the time to do something like that anymore. I also want to complete this video before October ends, to which I've already failed because of my health condition. With that being said, I had played the first few hours of Dead Space on Impossible to see what that difficulty had to offer. Basically, in that difficulty, The necromorphs are more aggressive and they can kill you pretty easily. But I think anyone who completed the game on hard can finish the game on impossible if they plan their upgrade path and use their weapon wisely. But the idea is always about spending enough time playing the games so that I can confidently make a review video out of them. Also, if you're expecting me to review a newly released video game in the near future, unfortunately I have a bad news for you. As of 2021, I have bought close to 1000 games and I've only completed less than 10% of them. For a person who talks a lot about hating the idea of wasting money or food in real life, I'm hypocritical for spending so much money on buying games that I didn't end up playing at all. There's a longer and more personal story that I would love to tell you about my terrible game hoarding habits, but that might be a story for another time. Now that we got that out of the way, let's finally begin the actual review. Thank you for staying through all of that. Welcome to my review of Dead Space. Sometime in 2008, in the small living room of my egregiously vandalized student apartment, I got bitten by a former university friend in Power Stone 2, which she had never played before. It's a 4-player action platformer party game made by Capcom for the Dreamcast that only I knew how to emulate on my PC. It wasn't that hard, but I was the only one who cared enough to do that. I was full of sodium chloride seeing how she gleefully gloated about beating my Wang Tang with her rouge. My Wang Tang couldn't finish his big Dragon Ball attack, an ultimate skill that takes up 3/4 space of the game screen because my former friend decided to throw a random box at my Wang Tang and kill him in the process. Next to us was a sad-looking balcony with an empty port where there used to be a mangled banana tree. Earlier that year on New Year's Eve, my former Kazakh friends and I used that same sad banana tree as a New Year tree for our small Kazakh team New Year's Eve party. We had procured the banana tree at a jungle behind my egregiously vandalized student apartment. At that party, we raised our glass to a live video of Vladimir Putin, who was the current president of Russia at that time. He addressed the Russian nation one final time during New Year's Eve, months before the presidential election the very same year. I'm actually not kidding about that. We actually did it. My former Kazakh friends loved Putin and the powerful machismo presence he exuded back in the day. My college years were strangely colorful, to say the least. After we had engrossed ourselves with Putin's long speech, we made toast to each other and feasted on a couple of delicious Kazakh traditional meals such as beshbarmak and qaza, just to name a few. We had roasted chicken too, but that's not a Kazakh traditional meal. Moments after that, we played Smackdown Here Comes the Pain, while we took turns inhaling an unrecognizable fruit-flavored tobacco through a cheap shisha that one of them had brought over. We were digitally trying to out-wrestle each other in a fatal 4-way match. With the extensive knowledge of the game's wrestling mechanic since I grew up playing that game, I one-sidedly emerged victorious. In that same Kazakh team New Year's Eve party, there was also a former Kazakh friend of mine whom I considered to be my own brother. I remember sometime in November the same year, in that very same living room, he enthusiastically described to me his experience playing Dead Space. I can still remember the sound he made with his mouth, mimicking the loud, thunderous sound effect of the weapon he used in the game. His excitement explaining what seems to be the greatest video game he has ever played can easily convince anyone to give Dead Space a try, even those who don't play video games at all. But he didn't manage to convince me. He walked out of my egregiously vandalized student apartment with a disappointed look on his face. He felt like I wasn't really listening to him. And he was right. I was so caught up in trying to impress the many ladies of my university with my understudied philosophical views of life. I rather Platoed my way to ladies' panties. While he was talking about Dead Space, I was thinking about inviting a lady over for some bodily fluid exchange. At that time, I was no longer the same person who enjoyed playing video games with friends. At that time, I was a pretentious, horny imbecile. And that was the last time I heard about Dead Space, until I started streaming Resident Evil 2 Remake sometime in October 2020 as a streamer formerly known as Old Mana. A fellow streamer slash content creator friend that goes by the name Brandplace asked me if I would like to play Dead Space 3 with him. We didn't end up doing it because, well, so much stuff has happened and we simply had forgotten about it. During that stream, the conversation I had with my former Kazakh friend and the weapon sound effects he made with his mouth echoed loudly in my head. The sound got even louder when the Bear King chose Dead Space as a game I should review for his birthday. So for those who don't know, Dead Space is a survival horror video game released on October 14, 2008. It was developed by Visceral Games, the same developer who made Godfather 1, The Godfather 2, and a game that was pretty ahead of its time called Future Cop LAPD. Dead Space sets in the year 2508 where mankind has achieved interstellar travel. Mankind also has the capability to do deep space mining with the assistance of a gigantic spaceship of epic proportions that they call Planet Cracker. Amongst all of the Planet Cracker class ships, there is one USG Ishimura, the first of its kind. The story begins when USG Ishimura sent a distress signal during its deep space mining excavation on a remote planet called Aegis 7 located in a Cygnus system. You take control of Isaac Clarke, a short grey-haired systems engineer dashing what seems to be a corroded space armor suit called Resource Integration Gear, or RIG for short. Along with computer specialist Kendra Daniels and Chief Security Officer of the USG Callion Zach Hammond, you headed straight to the last known whereabouts of USG Ishimura. Your task is basically to locate the missing vessel and repair the communication blackout that happened to it. During the interstellar travel towards the last known whereabouts of USG Ishimura, your character watched a video message of a lady who seemed distraught and confused about something. When you and your team finally located USG Ishimura and tried to dock inside it, an unidentified foreign object hit your shuttle. Thus you had forced Hammond to make a decision by forcefully landing the USG Callion inside the recently found mining vessel. Luckily, the whole crew survived. Daniels got really angry with Hammond and accused him of trying to get the team killed. Hammond denied the accusation, backing it up with the reason for his action. He told Daniel that he was just trying to quote-unquote save our asses. You got up from your seat and Daniel started syncing everyone's rig up with the vessel. 4 green bars of light gradually lighting up behind your back, forming a line. You and the rest of your team started investigating what had gone wrong with USG Ishimura. Something's not right. Where is everyone? Why is it so quiet? Hammond asked your character to log into the security console nearby. Hammond also asked Daniels to try and get the elevators running again. Daniels begrudgingly said that she can't because the power is dead. Hammond almost lost it. He then calmly asked Daniels to cooperate with him if she wanted to get out of the mining vessel as soon as possible. Hammond then asked your character to get the computer display up. One of the team members noticed that the USG Ishimura had taken a lot of damage. Hammond noticed that mining vessel's tram system is offline, but he was glad that the air system is flowing again. Shortly after that, a siren wailed off.
What the hell was that?
Automatic quarantine must have tripped when the filtration system restarted. Everybody relax.
What was that?
Not sure.
The hell? I don't know. Something's in the room with us.
Jesus! Open fire! Open fire! Sender! Power! Sender!
Come on. Got it!
Isaac! Get the hell out of there!
The door's unlocked! Run!
So what really happened in USG Ishimura? Spoiler alert for those who haven't played Dead Space and want to discover the story for themselves. Skip to this part if you don't want to get spoiled. Based on the logs we picked up throughout the game, the miners who were illegally conducting deep space mining in Aegis 7 found an alien object known as the Marker. Because of that, it had caused a lot of people to have some sort of dementia about their loved one being alive. Their hallucinations end up getting worse to a point where many of them started killing people and / themselves. The captain of the USG Ishimura, Benjamin Matthias, decided to quarantine the people and possibly the areas that were infected by the Marker.
My decision to quarantine the colony is sound. They've got some kind of epidemic down there and I can't allow it to infect the ship. Not with such precious cargo. Not when we are so close.
He was secretly part of Unitology, a church group created out of a martyr named Michael Altman.
I want to set the record straight. By the time this log is heard, my actions will have been vindicated. I'm a unitologist. By now, it's probably no secret that we shouldn't be in this star system.
Michael Altman was an anthropologist who was believed by the church to be assassinated by the government as a cover-up because he discovered proof of alien life on Earth. And the proof he found was the Marker. During the outbreak, two scientists named Dr. Chalice Mercer and Dr. Terence Kine met up with each other to discuss the unearthed alien object.
You found something down there, didn't you?
Yes, we found something.
So the texts were right all this time.
These two scientists, who were also Unitologists, were secretly tasked by the church to study the Marker because the church believed that the alien object contains the key to some sort of rebirth which will lead them to immortality.
I wouldn't be certain of that. There was nothing divine in what I saw.
We must embrace this. We are the first witnesses.
Matthias isn't letting anyone down in the colony. It's under quarantine until we learn more.
To hell with Matthias. He of all people should know that this is greater than him, or the operation, or even the company. This is our deliverance.
Keep your damn voice down. People are dying down there.
Only the worthless and the unbelievers. But I believe. Do you believe, Terence? Do you?
Soon after, things got worse as the diseased people from Aegis 7 mining colony transformed into grotesque creatures which were dubbed by Kine as necromorphs. The necromorphs somehow boarded the USG Ishimura, killing and infecting the members of the mining vessel. Around this time is when the two scientists had set off on different paths in dealing with the Marker. Sometime after that, we arrive. After being chased down by necromorphs and seeing one of them died in front of you, the game finally begins. You picked up your first weapon after you stepped out of the elevator and walked towards a working bench. During your second encounter with the necromorphs, you might have thought that they were pretty tough to kill. You were probably confused as to why they didn't even die after their heads had been blown off. If you hadn't paid attention to how the necromorphs who chased you to the elevator died, or if you missed reading the bloody message on the wall telling you how to kill the necromorph, that space will tell it to you again. One is by an audio log you picked up if you do a bit of exploration in the beginning.
This is Benson, Tram Engineering. We think we figured it out. Smith killed one. Listen, forget about shooting him in the body. You gotta cut off the limbs.
And the other is by a call from Hammond telling you how to kill the grotesque creatures after you have progressed just a little bit further into the game.
Isaac, be careful. Shooting them in the body didn't seem to work. Go for the limbs. Dismember them. That should do the job.
So from that point, you already know a more efficient way to defend yourself against the necromorphs. The type of weapon you use, its damage point, and the difficulty you chose before the start of your game determine how many times, how many limbs, and which part of the limb you need to shoot in order to stop them from violently mutilating you. Not to mention there are also different types of necromorphs which will influence the way you take them down. The necromorphs aren't just some naked alien zombie with sharp pokey limbs. They can crawl through the vent, and if there are enough of them, they can flank and surround you. So if you're not paying attention to them and your surroundings carefully, there's a high chance that you'll be their space Lunchables. Some of them even attack you from your blind spot, especially when you're busy working on certain tasks in order to proceed to the next area. Running past them to avoid getting hurt might not be as easy as those other survival horror games that you are familiar with. They will instantly attack or grab you and do some damage to your health. and it's a lot of damage if you're playing it on harder difficulties. You can of course mash the A button on your controller, or if you're playing with a mouse and keyboard, rapidly press the E key to free yourself from the dangerous grabs faster. But the best option to always stay back at a safe distance and blasting their lower limbs to slow them down so you can reposition yourself better to either run away or fight them back. You can also use stomps and melee attacks to further increase your survivability, but don't ever use them as a way to primarily attack them with. That is unless you hate yourself and decided to do a no weapon, stomp and slap only challenge run with Dead Space, which I don't think will be that much fun. But the general idea is to cut their limbs off in order to get rid of them. Your character's health bar is shown on his rig in the form of segmented glowing green bars situated on his spine area. And the health bar design is part of the UI interface design or UI design philosophy, where the developers want it to be part of the game world itself and not just made for you, the player. So if you pull out a map and when you're organizing your inventory, the UI was designed in a way that your character is also looking at the map and also organizing the inventory. Like every other survival horror game of the same vein, you have limited space to carry your stuff and you can't really go trigger happy with your weapon. This means you need to constantly conserve your ammo, organize your inventory frequently, and store the weapons you don't really use. You can increase your inventory slot by buying newly upgraded rigs at the store. Besides allowing you to carry more stuff, these new rigs also give you more defense. The stores in Dead Space look like futuristic ATM machines. You are likely to find one at the start and also at the end of each chapter in the game. You can use these stores to buy and sell your ammos, items, weapon, and as I've mentioned before, new rigs. Of course, you can also use the stores to, well, store your stuff. In Dead Space, all transactions you conducted in the stores use a currency called credits. Besides selling the items you no longer want, you get credits by either killing the necromorphs, which sometimes drop a certain amount of the said currency, scavenging the boxes and chests, or by selling various semiconductors you found throughout the game. Another way to get more items, weapons, and new rigs to purchase in stores are by finding schematics that are scattered throughout Dead Space. If you bring them to any stores in the game, they will unlock more stuff for you to buy, and what they unlock are based on what schematics you have found. The store reminds me of another survival horror game I've played on the Dreamcast called Blue Stinger. In that game, you buy healing items and weapons in vending machines. Also, that's the game that I'll review around Christmas, so watch out for that. Blue Stinger is too interesting of a game not to make a video about. There are a total of 6 weapons available to you in Dead Space. Most of them are actually mining tools that your character repurposed to obliterate the necromorphs. This means that those tools don't exactly behave like standard weapons you are most probably accustomed to in most survival horror games. Take the example of a force gun. On the surface, it behaves like a shotgun in other survival horror games, but mechanically it serves better as a tool to push the necromorphs away from you towards the hazardous environment or knock them from their feet at a safe distance. Each of these weapons has its own alternate firing mode. For example, plasma cutter can change the alignment of your shot, the line gun can release a devastating time mine, and the pulse rifle can do this. You can also upgrade the weapons you have by spending power nodes on their respective upgrade trees. You get access to these upgrade trees by using benches that are stationed throughout Dead Space, not to be confused with the bench where you picked up your first weapon. The way you upgrade your weapons on these benches is by placing the power nodes inside the special slots in the upgrade tree of whatever weapon you want to upgrade. Once you place a power node inside any slot, you can't get it back. All of the upgrade trees also require you to place 1 or 2, sometimes 3 power nodes on non-special slots before you can place them on the special ones. This means you have to plan your upgrade path on each upgrade tree properly so that you don't overuse the power nodes. Some of these upgrades are more than just increasing damage and reload speed. It can also change the width of the weapon's fire or its projectile speed. You can also upgrade your rigs for longer health bars, more air when you're in areas with no oxygen, as well as the range and the duration of your models. We'll get to what models are soon. You get power nodes by finding these boxes on the wall or sometimes by defeating powerful necromorphs. You can also buy them at stores if you have substantial credits to burn. Dead Space progression is broken down by chapters. Besides obliterating the necromorphs, you'll be doing certain tasks to fix certain things in order to progress from one chapter to the next. These tasks will get progressively more interesting and sometimes harder than the previous ones. It ranges from flipping a couple of switches to moving an object while being ganked by different types of necromorphs, as if you're taking away the last bread from a supermarket in Malaysia during the lockdown. For Australian, just change the bread part to toilet papers, put a supermarket from your country and you know what I mean. Completing most of these tasks require you to use modules that you find pretty early in the game. The status module basically freezes something in place, and the kinesis module allows you to move objects and manipulate them easily. You can also use them on the necromorphs to help you gain better advantage in defeating them. The tasks that you need to complete will force you to be in areas with zero gravity, zero oxygen, or even both. In zero gravity's area, your feet will always stick to the surface you're walking on. This is because you have a zero gravity boot that is preventing you from floating around in those areas. You have a jump button that you can use, and it will allow you to, well, jump and stick on any surface that is stickable. These areas would also affect your weapon. For example, you won't be able to use your flamethrower in an areas with zero oxygen. And as for areas with zero gravity, the force gun alternate fire will no longer fire in an arc trajectory, but instead it will go directly straight to wherever you were aiming at. Once you completed the main task of a chapter, you can hop onto the train and proceed to the next one. Even though the areas of each chapter aren't really connected to one another, the clever use of a camera made it feel like it was. And that is basically Dead Space. There are a lot of things that I like about Dead Space. So let's talk about them, beginning with the UI. I really love the way they designed it. It's great, I really have no complaints about it. It doesn't feel intrusive, which in turn makes you feel like you're part of the world and not just controlling an avatar with stats only you can see. The game's health bar design reminds me of another game called Trespasser, where they show your character's health bar in the form of a tattoo on her chest. If you know any other games that do this, list them down below in the comments, because I like knowing and seeing cool UI design like this. At first, it seemed to me that the environments within Dead Space lack varieties, but as I progress further into the game, they definitely feel and look different to one another. From the industrial areas with aesthetics that reminds me of movies like Aliens and Event Horizon, to morbidly beautiful mess hall filled with lifeless bodies that gave the idea that they were sacrificed to some messed up cult. It never felt like the environments were out of place either. They felt distinct yet cohesive. After all, you're in a spaceship in space. I especially love the zero gravity and the space environment that Dead Space puts me in whenever I have to complete certain tasks. It was fun to be in those areas because they sometimes mess with my orientations, which forced me to adapt and realign myself so that I could finish the task given. It felt unique. Without revealing too much, there was a task near the end of the game that required me to think outside the box. Once I figure it out, I love the way that they make me go from one environment onto the next one in order to complete it. It was a freaking cool experience. Some of these areas have interesting environmental storytelling too if you pay enough attention to them. For example, I came across these weird rows of small lockers that store what seem to be body parts, complete with labels on them. I asked myself, what is it for? Does it relate to all of the infants I see in the tanks? Did those tiny necromorphs that I had been fighting come out of these tanks? What about the text log I found that shows a list of newborns? Are they related to the infants in the tank? Why does this remind me so much of Dark Souls? Wait, is this before Dark Souls? Is Dead Space Dark Souls in space? All jokes aside, I enjoyed taking my time exploring and figuring out the areas I was in and what happened to it. And in case some of you were wondering, all of these infants you see in the tanks are possibly clones being lab-grown as body part replacement for what I can assume workers and miners who lost their limbs and body parts during the deep space mining excavation. Welcome to 2508, where you can replace your main intromittent organ you accidentally cut off with a plasma cutter with clone babies. The sound design in Dead Space is another reason why I like the game. I'm not really an audiophile, but I really want to try my best. So for sound designers out there who are watching this and want to add on to what I've said, leave a comment down below. I would appreciate it. The sound design for each environment are unique and it really enhances the atmosphere when you're in them. I think it's best if I just shut up and let you hear them yourself. The ambient noise and the soft yet creepy whispers I heard from time to time engrossed me as if I was actually there. If you really want to enjoy Dead Space in its entirety, you have to play it while wearing good headphones or use a good surround sound system. Another aspects of the sound design that I really enjoy in this game are the sound effects. I like the sound of your character running out of breath when he's almost out of air, the sound of necromorphs crawling to the vent that makes you stay on guard, and not to forget the sound of the weapons being fired off. I don't know how to quite explain how great the weapon sound effects are. Just listen to some of them. Of course, since Dead Space is a horror game, there are many creepy and scary moments within it. Most of them strangely manage to be over the top without feeling goofy. Well, maybe for that one death animation of your character where his head gets cut off and replaced with a necromorph head, and also probably this.
Claire wants to take me. Just shut up.
Is it bad that I like how goofy this looks? As a 34-year-old Southeast Asian brown man who is more scared of something like Doki Doki Literature Club or Don't Hug Me I'm Scared, I appreciated the unexpected jump scares and the rabbit-like movement and behaviors of the necromorphs. To me, that's what makes survival horror games like Dead Space or even Resident Evil scary. Knowing that I have to tread carefully with my steps and worrying if I have enough ammo to defend myself against the fast-moving necromorphs. It is ultimately the reason why I think surviving the horrors in survival horror games terrifying. But as you may know, there are only so many times one can get scared with Dead Space after one has played it several times. So what kept me coming back for this game? What prevented me from getting bored of Dead Space? The answer is the game's excellent combat. The combat alone makes this game one of the most fun I've ever had in a survival horror game. Instead of completely copying the combat movements, feels and mechanics from other survival horror games that they were inspired from, the developers made enough changes to make it feel like their own. Moving Isaac, the character you're controlling throughout the game, feels fluid and smooth. Fighting against the necromorphs feel visceral and tactical. And they did this without sacrificing the survival horror aspects of the game. It's a great take to the formula that they were following, and I really like it. The first weapon I got, which is the plasma cutter, doesn't feel like a basic weapon that you usually get in the beginning of a survival horror game. Once I upgraded it enough, it was a really powerful weapon that I constantly defaulted to in the later part of the game in my first and second playthrough. And they balanced the combat encounters relatively well with their enemies, so I don't feel like I was that powerful. I also like that the ammo drop system encouraged me to play with other weapons too. The weapons are vastly different to one another, each with its own unique and strength and weaknesses. Well, except for the flamethrower. The weapon is kinda terrible if I'm being honest. But in one fight I refuse to spoil in this video, flamethrower kinda slaps. There are also hazardous environments and objects that I can use to my advantage, which in turn gives me more options during combat. If you're like me and you have spent time experimenting with the weapons, the modules, and the environments you're in, you definitely know that taking out the necromorphs in Dead Space can feel incredibly satisfying and cathartic. Since you started off not knowing how the disaster started, the only way to know what happened to the mining vessel is by examining the audio, text, and video logs you've picked up as you progress through the game. Now, I know there are a lot of people who hate this style of storytelling in video games, but for me, I didn't really mind it at all. And I think Dead Space did a good job with it. It was very engaging, and it kept me wanting to find out more about what happened. Without spoiling anything, there are certain audio logs that follow stories from two different angles. Eventually, these two stories converge as you progress further into the game. And that converged story ended in an unexpected way. I was pleasantly surprised because I didn't expect it to end it that way at all. To me, it is worth spending time examining the logs and paying attention to them because of how well it was integrated into the game. I do wish that the main storyline would be more interesting than the stories we got from the logs. Although I do have to say, the clever way Dead Space misdirected me in the main storyline definitely caught me by surprise. And finally, without sounding like a pervert, I really like the tentacle parts in the game. To be honest, pointing out a couple of these bad things in Dead Space feels nitpicky to me. Like how some chapters would lead you to revisiting the same areas again. Or some of the tasks in the game weren't that hard and they felt too gamey to do. There were also some of the moments in the game that got repeated with minor differences. The boss fight could have been more interesting, and some of them were arguably easy, especially when I was using the right weapon. Those things didn't really bother me that much. Most of them felt ignorable enough for me to enjoy the game. And as for the boss fights, some of them were pretty challenging when I didn't use the obvious weapons and methods that would have made the fight easier. So that's that. However, there are two things that stood out to me throughout my playthroughs of Dead Space. The first one being the main storyline of the game. While there are few great moments in the story, the majority of the time was spent with some characters asking me to do tasks for them. If it wasn't for the stellar voice acting deliveries, I probably wouldn't get invested that much in Dead Space main story. As I mentioned before, the stories I got from the logs were much more interesting than the storyline that my character was in. Some of the key parts of the story happened on video calls with whoever I was interacting with. There were also a lot of moments that happened with certain characters standing behind a glass wall and telling your character what they're planning to do. I'm not sure if I was missing something there or if there were symbolic reasons as to why they would play out like that, but that definitely felt out of place for me. This next one isn't really that bad, but more of a mixed bag for me, and that would be the upgrade system. As I've said previously in this video, you use power nodes to upgrade your weapons, modules, and rig. When I wanted to upgrade my rig, its upgrade tree required me to waste a couple of power nodes on useless slots before I got to the ones that would actually upgrade it. Moreover, the power nodes are also required to open specially locked doors in the game. Granted, it's not that bad because majority of the time I could sell whatever items I got behind these specially locked doors and make enough money to buy a new power node in the stores. But that still means that I still have to acquire a substantial amount of power nodes to upgrade all of my stuff. That feels unnecessary and excessive to me. I feel like the upgrade system can be simplified by using less power nodes to upgrade your gears, making them rarer and tougher to acquire in the game, thus making them rewarding when you get them. Also, if you want to have all of your weapons and gears upgraded to their maximum potentials, you have to play the game again twice in the same save. By the time you realize that upgrading a weapon to a noticeable difference requires a long haul, you're probably gravitating towards spending your power nodes into a single weapon on your playthrough before upgrading anything else like I did. Regardless of the difficulty on your first playthrough of Dead Space, this probably leaves a little desire to use other weapons and you end up sticking to that one weapon you have been upgrading throughout the game. But like I said, the upgrade system was a mixed bag for me. Some of the weapons are pretty powerful without any upgrade, even on harder difficulties. As you can already tell, hopefully, I really like Dead Space. The weapons were fun and felt incredibly satisfying to use thanks to their unique designs and great sound effects. I never got bored obliterating the different types of necromorphs with them. The level and environment designs were creepy and fun, especially in the areas with zero gravity and/or zero oxygen. Not to mention that the unexpected jump scares and its rabbit-like enemy behaviors made some of the areas feel scary for a 34-year-old Southeast Asian man who is more scared of creepy anime girls and dolls. Any non-audiophiles like me can easily tell that the sound designs were masterfully crafted. Examining the logs and the environments in the game, trying to piece together what happened before my character got there, were rewarding when some of the stories came to its unexpected conclusions. Even though the main storyline felt like I was forced to do task after task at times, it managed to make me interested in it again thanks to a clever misdirection. The upgrade system to me, however, left a lot to be desired, but thankfully, it didn't ruin the core experiences that I had with the game. I never got bored during all of my 3 playthroughs of Dead Space thanks to its great combat mechanics and difficulty options. They allow me to change my playstyle and experiment with it on each playthrough. That alone is a hallmark of an excellently designed video game, and the interesting and excellent spin of the standard survival horror formula by Visceral Games has made Dead Space a great survival horror game to play.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
Hello there again. I hope you enjoyed my review of Dead Space. I really like the game. I try my best not to spoil the game as much as I can in my review because I anticipate that many of you haven't played it because you probably haven't gotten around to it yet, like I was. But let me know in the comment if you don't mind spoilers so I can talk more about certain parts of games I'm reviewing in the future, okay? Stay healthy, everyone.
Bye.